Hi, everybody, and welcome to the next instalment of the Mirus Australia webinar series. We do these every month. I have been doing them every month for over a year now, and we appreciate everybody coming along to them every month to listen to the next topic. The topic today, we're talking about care minutes and quarterly financial reporting. Before I begin, I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we gather today and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Where we are today, that is the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation. But I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present across Australia, wherever you may be today. And I extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples on this call. So welcome to everybody who's on the call today. Thanks for joining us and taking time out of your busy schedule. And we have a number of panelists, provider panelists again today. I'll introduce them a little bit later when we speak to them. But we've got an interesting topic today talking about care minutes. We find in our conversations with providers, and we're talking to over 100 providers every month, a lot of those conversations now are steering towards care minutes. Care minutes have settled in a little bit. Everyone's got over the idea that funding is connected to care minutes. Everybody's submitted 3 quarterly financial reports. So everyone's sort of getting the hang of that reporting. Whether it's working well or not is another question. But certainly, and people are sort of getting used to the interpretation of care minutes and how that's impacting their organisation. But care minutes are a profound and significant change in the new funding model from the way that we used to do it. And so now that we're 6, 7 months in, 8 months in to the funding model, what is care minutes all about, and how is it really impacting our business? That's what we're really talking about. And I just wanted to start by acknowledging, some of the recent press that's been out there about the benefits of running a business and the benefits of focusing on financial sustainability. I just wanted to reiterate that everyone who works in this industry, all of you and us included, are all about providing the best possible care to the residents, the nearly 200,000 residents in our residential aged care homes. And financial sustainability is key to making sure as much funding as possible is flowing through to the provision of care for those important people. So one of the things that we do, I just wanted to remind you, we do have a chat going. There is a chat, and we want you to please ask questions in that chat. If we've got time at the end of the webinar, we will look at some of those questions and some of those themes and try to answer them. But we always review those questions and those comments, and they form the basis for the content that we include in our Mirus mail every month to make sure that we're getting the right information out based on what people need. But so please ask questions in the chat. Please be careful to make sure that you put the question to everyone rather than just to the panelists, so that everyone can see the chat. So please ask questions in the chat, and we've got Petra today monitoring those questions, and she'll answer as many as she can live during the session. One of the things that we're doing now is asking you a couple of questions as you register to see what, do a bit of a pulse check on a couple of questions as we go into the topic. This topic being care minutes, we asked 4 questions about care minutes, and here are the results for those of you who are interested. And there's over 400 responses. So for those of you who have done any polling in the past, 400 responses is a pretty significant sample. So let's have a look at what they say. Our care minute target is realistic, achievable, and sustainable. What's interesting here is, over sort of 36% agree or strongly agree that their target is realistic, achievable, and sustainable. So over a third, and but still nearly half disagree or strongly disagree. So probably more what we expected, that care minutes is still something we're coming to terms with, but really interesting to see that well over a third of people have started to believe that the care minute targets are reasonable. We'll be able to recruit adequate care staff to meet our care minutes target by October 1. Not surprisingly, 55% disagree or strongly disagree. We understand right from the get-go that workforce is the #1 issue in aged care at the moment, and where we're getting staff from is not going away. There are a number of factors, in fact, that's making that worse, not better. Number one being the increased demand. But we do have a wage rise from the wage review, so we have an opportunity to put more money into the system and pay staff more. So that might attract more people to the sector. We'll have to see how things like that play out. But there's still 30% of people who agree or strongly agree that they will have the staff to meet their care minute targets by the 1st of October. So again, some growing optimism there. AN-ACC funding is adequate to meet the cost of the care minutes that we require to deliver. So this is just the age-old question, which is, are we getting enough funding? Interestingly, or not surprisingly, nearly or over 50%, 51% disagree or strongly disagree. So still don't think the funding is enough. It's interesting that when we started this poll and people started registering and doing this poll, it was before the budget statement on the wage case. And the rest of the polling happened afterwards. So some uncertainty about that wage case and how you're going to fund it might have been contributing to this question. But 29% strongly agree that the funding is enough, but still 51% disagree. So that's probably what we expected. And lastly, a question we always ask was, do you have the systems and the knowledge to really manage care minutes, which is a lot of what we're going to be talking about today. And interestingly, over 50% of people said they did. They agreed that they did, which is probably a little bit surprising for us because the majority of the conversations we're having are about, difficulties, either inefficiencies, so they're coping with it, you're doing it, but you're actually, it's inefficient and it's taking a lot of resource and your systems aren't what they need to be. So, but still, a quarter of people are struggling with that, and quite a big number, 22%, couldn't answer either way. So that's interesting as well. So just some of the poll data, just to warm us up and ease into the context of it. Now we're going to switch gears and go to our data scientist, Tyler, who's going to do what we always do at the beginning of these sessions and talk to us about the data and what it's telling us on this topic.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. And so I guess to sort of continue on that thinking that you framed up, Andrew, is not only the concept of meeting care minutes, but how you fund that care minute requirement. And so what we're looking at here is the cumulative increase in subsidy and wages since 2015 compared to CPI. And comparing subsidy indexation and fair work decisions to CPI is something we've often done to understand trends over time, particularly for a high-level view of changes to operating margin. Over the years, this was typically a way to visualize and discuss the inadequacy of ACFI indexation. Awards and CPI frequently outpaced the annual subsidy adjustment. Then right in the last couple of years here, so looking right at the right-hand side of that chart, introduction of AN-ACC in October last year really slingshot subsidy growth well past the comparative measures of CPI and award. And then come July this year, both the award and subsidy will realize the largest jumps ever. So over the past 8 years, wages and subsidy will have grown by the same amount, which is 36%, which is sort of an interesting note on that time period. But obviously that subsidy growth really doing a lot of catch up just in this last year. What this does is this really affirms the direct takeaway from the Royal Commission and what led to the implementation of a care minute mandate. And that is providers must spend more on clinical care. How much more? That is really an exercise to be undertaken site by site. We have that visibility now of what our case mix is. So that mandated care minute requirement, we know what that number is. And we now see what subsidy revenue will be entitled to. So this really allows every facility to determine the budget for the appropriate skill mix based on a organization or facility defined model of care, and that in turn provides a target for subsidy management, and that gives us a known position in relation to compliance. And so I'll talk a bit more about that concept of targets and having that known position. But first, let's have a look at the upcoming changes to the NWOW and the RVUs. So on the next slide, this is really sort of visualizing those changes to come, well, starting from October last year. But in July, well, and what we know now is that in its first ever indexation of the Aged Care National Weighted Activity Unit, the Independent Health and Aged Care Pricing Authority has provided the largest ever increase to aged care subsidy. This comes just 9 months after what is now the second largest increase to subsidy. The industry, if we look at where we will be at June, so at the end of the financial year, we will finish largely where the Department of Health had predicted, and that is with an average case mix of 200 minutes and an average daily subsidy of $225. We will also see a really significant recalibration of the relative value units for each ANAC class commencing from October this year. So when we compare those relative starting points from October 2022 to 1 year later, we can see that subsidy will have grown by 15%, and average case mix will have grown by only 2%. And so September, where we'll have that last month under the current RVU weightings, you can see in October, the case mix for the industry will actually decline as a result of this recalibration. So the biggest contributing factors to the decline are Class 5 care minute requirement reducing by 7% and Class 7 care minute requirement reducing by 1.6%. And those two classes both are the most common for the industry. But now if we move on to see how this impacts providers operationally, we can begin to discuss the implications. And I guess what I'll start by saying is that ANAC claim data will be provided to the Aged Care Quality and Safety Commission, which they will use along with other regulatory intelligence to assess the suitability of the skill mix within services. Care minutes establish a minimum quantity of care. This responsibility is in addition to the responsibility of approved providers under the Aged Care Act to maintain an adequate number of appropriately skilled staff to ensure that care needs of care recipients are met. Residential aged care providers that do not have an appropriately skilled workforce are at risk of not meeting the aged care quality standards. How you choose to align your staff skill mix to resident case mix to remain compliant can take on many forms. Models of care across the industry vary widely and can be adapted to meet the availability constraints region by region or the varying complexity of the care required service by service. But to be clear, legislation requires that residents receive the care they need, period. There should never be any strategy to detract from that. In fact, as we've seen in the previous two slides, there is more funding than ever to contribute to precisely that. How we disperse that funding through a model of care and a roster demand template has massive implications for compliance and for the sustainability of the organization. And what this chart is showing is where every facility in the industry is currently performing in relation to meeting its total care minute requirement and RN care minute requirement. There are many services with massive exposure to risk, therefore need to spend significantly more on care. Alternatively, many facilities have care costs far greater than the current resident case mix is designed to fund. So these facilities would likely be operating at a loss. It really is now up to every service to determine the appropriate balance between Medicare claiming and rostering in order to maintain compliant, but also sustainable. And so with that in mind, I'll just pass back to Andrew so we can hear from our panel and hear their thoughts and experiences.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler. Some interesting data there, and yeah, of course, one point that has to be reiterated is that funding and care, in terms of quality of care, are two very different things. And so the funding that we attract for a resident is really determined by the algorithm and by the ANAC classifications and the ANAC assessments and the external assessor. And the care delivered is really being delivered by the clinical assessment by the very qualified people in the facilities, and the care plans, and get really governed by the standards. So they're two quite different things. And one of the things that really struck me during the week was really the external assessment process and the care minute calculation, and how important that is to the way that we think about the funding of aged care now, in the sense that really in lots of ways, which is very different to ACFI, the maximum funding that you can achieve for a resident is, because it's externally assessed, is their actual care requirement. So it will very, very close to their care requirement. So there is very little opportunity to, relatively less opportunity to achieve a funding level beyond the actual care requirement and the care being delivered by that, for that resident. So in some ways, if you think about it, the maximum funding you can achieve is the 100% of the funding that you're entitled to, based on the care that needs to be delivered for that resident. So in some ways, it's more of a recovery model now, where you are trying to recover 100% of the care that you're delivering. And the efficiency of this model and the ability to manage it efficiently is really about recovering all of the funding that you're entitled to because of the care needs of that resident, and therefore the care that is being delivered through your quality and care plans and care planning, and as being reviewed by the Quality and Safety Commission. So really, this is really about managing those classifications, managing the care minute that relates to those classifications, and really managing that as efficiently as possible, because any inefficiency in that process reduces the potential funding that you're getting for care that is being delivered for a care need for that resident that is a requirement, and therefore you need to try to continue to achieve 100% of the funding that's required. So let's come and hear from our panel now. So I'll just introduce them. Unfortunately, Matt Hartley has got caught up and is running a bit late. So we're not going to hear from him till a bit later in the webinar. And we also had another panelist pull out last minute because of COVID. So COVID's still around, and we can't do much about that. But we do have two excellent panelists with us: Jay Smith from Mercy Care, and Michelle Sloan is very well known in the industry from Summit Care. So we'll just go to you two guys, and really the question I always ask at this point really is just from your point of view. If we start with you, Jay, from your point of view, how has care minutes impacted your organisation? I think that's what people want to know. So overall and generally, how has care minutes impacted your organisation, and how has your organisation reacted to it?
Yeah, look, I guess, firstly, thanks for having me today. I put together some notes to share with everyone that hopefully is beneficial, but always happy to talk offline if anyone wants to reach out. From our point of view, it's been about being decisive and not letting this reform piece be something that simply happened to us. We've been quite proactive in working on some of these topics. The first of which was repositioning our model of care. That's largely been about a structural alignment focused on holistic care and responsibilities, really. It's been about documenting our care minute policy and actually having that piece of work written down. It's been, that's sort of been, I guess, guided by participating in a real-time study. We've worked with government on that to verify our assumptions there. And we're looking forward to getting the report back. We're also embedding governance and compliance leaders at a local level at each one of our homes to really support all of the work that goes into this. Second big piece of work has been investing in tech solutions. This is about gaining efficiencies, but most importantly, we are very data rich, but the way in which we can interpret that data has not been particularly useful in the past. So for us, this has been two pieces, the first of which is around our workforce planning and compliance reporting technology. A large part of that is along with Mirus, and we're currently working on the Care Minute, implementing the Care Minute module with your team. We have also worked on our mobile documentation hardware and software, getting mobile devices in the hands of our team on the floor so that they can document care being provided at the bedside. That's been really important for us. More specifically, I guess into a bit of the detail, we've been working on recruitment. We have a great talent team. They've been embedding really efficient processes and also reflecting on our data. We've been working on our alternative provisions of clinical care. We recognise that RN recruitment is a challenge for the industry. It's not going to go away overnight. So we have been documenting, I guess, what our alternatives are, how our quality care will continue if and when we encounter workforce shortages, and mitigating the risks, putting our supporting strategies in place for each one of the identified alternatives to that provision of clinical care. The reform piece has become a massive part of our organisation here at Mercycare. Every single part of the organisation has adopted it. It's not being worked on as a side project. Absolutely every department person has had buy-in. And I guess my advice, if I could share some, was that everyone needs to pull in the same or at least similar direction. That's been, I guess, key for us here.
Thanks, Jay. Yeah, some great thoughts there. Really, the thought about thinking about continuity. So what that quality care is going to look like in case of workforce shortages. I think that's a fantastic piece of work to start thinking about. It's dealing with an inevitability, and I think the webinar from the Commission recently, one of the few things that they did talk about. They didn't put a lot of information out there, but one of the few things they did talk about was taking a reasonable view and looking at mitigation strategies. So having some forethought about what those mitigation strategies are and even documenting them is probably a very, very good idea. Michelle, what's been happening at Summit Care, and how have you been dealing with care minutes as a new way of thinking in the business?
Yeah, hi, Andrew, and thanks again also for inviting me to be here today. Like Jay, we've been obviously focusing a lot on the...
Did you just mute, Michelle?
Did I mute myself? Sorry.
Sorry, that's all right.
I was just saying, we've sort of taken a step back and had a good look at the reform that was coming and tried to segment it into sizable chunks, sort of like eating the elephant, so that people weren't overwhelmed by the onslaught of what was taking place. The Care Minute aspects, I guess when the Care Minutes were announced, it to a large extent validated our own processes and thoughts around rostering. We put a lot of attention on our staff and workforce. Back in 2020, we, I think, recognized that we had to focus on ensuring we had enough talent in the business, and we invested in a talent acquisition department under the HR, people and culture area, to try and build our own casual pools and people within the business that we could call on to ensure we reduced agency. So therefore we had that familiarity of staff. We also implemented as a board, on the recommendation of our CFO, some tools and some technology that has been tracking our labour hours on a 24-hour period and by month and a rolling average for the year for quite some time now. So it maps to our payroll system. So we can know at any time where we see there are shortages in RNs or other staff. And I guess Care Minutes validated what we already thought in that sense. The way we've tried to deal with it is continual and open conversation and communications with our leadership teams. We've developed a future leaders program to try and bring on our own staff because we recognised early on we weren't going to be able to recruit people in. We have a number of AINs that will graduate and do graduate that we employ as RNs as well. And a lot of our junior care managers or assistant care managers have moved up into care management roles and into general management roles. We also replaced on a attrition basis all of our general managers to ensure, well, we didn't replace them. When they left, we ensured that we replaced them all with registered nurses. So we have registered nurses leading each of our homes. We've taken quite a strategic approach. We know exactly where we need to have more qualified staff. And of course, like everyone, it's just not easy. So whilst we feel that it's been funded well, there is still a lot of areas that aren't funded. And we have concerns about that moving forward into the new year. We have increased our compliance presence. So we have a team that obviously work in each home and report back from a strategic point of view to identify any risk profiles or areas, sorry, that's my phone, in any of the homes. And so, you know, the impact obviously is always going to be the recruitment. The cost of recruitment is getting more expensive, the scarcity of staff and the quality of the staff we're employing for that care delivery ultimately. So the impact has not been major in that sense, but we're very aware of it, and we continue to monitor it very closely. It's at the top of our conversations.
It sounds like it hasn't had a big impact on you, Michelle, a little bit because you started worrying about it a bit earlier than maybe some. Not that workforce issues have not been around for a long time, but a really interesting point that you made there, which I have heard a number of times, which is, you know, the cost of recruitment going up is one thing, but you know, the scarcity of staff means that, you know, you actually are accepting staff maybe that you wouldn't accept in other circumstances. So what is that doing to the overall you know, quality of the staff that are in the industry? But the other thing is, yeah, I really loved your point about trying to create internal processes for developing, you know, homegrown RNs. What a great initiative. I have heard that being done other places as well, but and it does take a bit of setting up and it takes a bit of investment, and also that casual pool that you've developed. I'm sure that didn't happen overnight either, but I'm sure it's a great thing now, and I definitely think the whole industry has to move towards a greater level of flexibility. So that's going to be really important going forward. All right, so what are the other things we try to do in, I'll come back to you guys in a little while, and hopefully Matt's joined us by then and we can talk to him as well, and ask you a little bit more about what you're going to do going forward. But before we do that, we just wanted to try and give everyone a few things to think about in terms of what we're hearing in the industry and what we're talking to providers about. The first one, of course, is planning to meet the targets. So one of the interesting things that's happening now that a couple of got a few QFRs under your belt, starting to get your head around how you've decided to interpret the rules around what's care minutes and what's not care minutes, is people are starting to now turn their heads to being a little bit more sophisticated about how they plan to meet those targets. Definitely with October 1 looming, that's a really important part. And I really think the shift in mindset is moving away from having to think about how you're going to collect that data and report on against whatever rules however you've decided to interpret those rules at a point in time at the end of the quarter to do the QFR reporting. So the department, when we caught up with them last, told us that something like very high 90s, 97% of people are meeting the QFR, are making the QFR report. So they're actually submitting their QFR report on time. And I know they've been a little bit more lenient, and they're getting a little less lenient with the timing of that submission. But, so the majority of people are managing, by far the majority, almost everybody is managing to submit a QFR report, which is great. Now, what is the quality of that report? How accurate is the data? Really depends on how well you can pull that information out of your systems. And a lot of people are having a lot of problems with that. It's very inefficient, very ineffective, requires a lot of manual work. A lot of systems don't include things like agency staff. So you've got to manually add that back in. That's if you can get that or track that agency staff data in the first place. And then there's, of course, the interpretation of the rules and what you're going to include and what you're not going to include. That's a very time-consuming thing. So even the thought of doing it once a year is bad enough, let alone the idea of doing it once a quarter. But now with 3 quarters in, people have got a fairly good idea of what that workload feels like. And definitely a lot of people we're speaking to are doing something about trying to make that whole process more efficient, and that makes sense. But the other thing that they're thinking about is, okay, so now we've got our head around how we do this once retrospectively at the end of the quarter. How do we now move that forward? How do we move that upstream and start thinking about how we can actually try to run that report more frequently? How are we actually developing our rosters and making sure that we are planning to meet our care minute targets? And then how do we know during that period of time whether we're meeting them or not? How much value would be created if we could produce that report monthly? And so that we had 2 monthly opportunities to have a look at that forward. How do we start moving towards a world where we're actually looking at that data on a daily, weekly, or at least a roster basis to know whether we're actually on track or not on track and what we have to do cumulatively? That's where people are shifting their minds to now. Some people are still stuck with how do we actually just get the process of running our QFR report quarterly? How do we get that to be more efficient? But a lot of people are also starting to shift towards how do we actually embed that into a more business as usual process so that we can use that information and use that data to create more certainty around the result that we're going to get at the end of the quarter. Now, I think the department in a lot of ways has done us all a favor by making those targets quarterly, because that's definitely smoothed out the requirement. And there will be at times a difference between achieving the quarterly target that's set for your care minutes and the Quality and Safety Commission coming in and deciding whether you are adequately providing care. So providing care minutes, being compliant with your care minutes doesn't mean you're delivering quality care, and not being compliant with your care minutes also doesn't mean that you're not delivering quality care. So it's just a rough metric, a quantifiable number that now exists in our industry and can be used. So meeting your care minute compliance will affect your star ratings. Again, the star ratings is a consumer index. It's really going to affect your occupancy more than anything else. That's what it's designed for. But what it is a framework and an algorithm that's been built around your quality indicators, around your compliance, around your consumer experience, and around your care minutes. So at the commission webinar a few weeks ago, they did say that they will look at that framework and they will look at the 1 and 2 star players, and the people at the bottom of the list are going to be the people that they're most interested in. So as much as it's a consumer index and some people will care about that star rating and some people won't care about that star rating, there is a compliance requirement that's going to become mandatory on October 1, which is you need to meet these care minutes the way that they're being calculated. And one of the ways that the Commission is going to target the people who are not meeting those care minutes is by looking at the segmentation that's already available through the star rating. So it's something to be mindful of. If you're sitting at a 1 and 2 star rating, you're probably going to be on their target list, as they've said. So definitely a planning, actually being able to plan more carefully, looking forward. So what am I trying to achieve? And then somehow be able to build a way of then measuring that during the quarter to know where you are and what you can possibly do to continue to meet those requirements towards the end of the quarter, rather than have them be a surprise, basically, at the end when you pull all your numbers. Another thing that's coming out of the conversations we're having quite significantly is these 3 particular areas. The first one is agency management. You can't, most businesses can't avoid using some agency some of the time. There are unavoidable circumstances. Michelle was talking about a casual workforce pool that might reduce that slightly, but there is probably a need to be proactive in the way that you think about agency management. As the Productivity Commission acknowledged, it's probably an unavoidable part of the system. It is a higher cost, and if you don't expect that cost, if you're having to fund agency, use agency to fill a lot of beds, a lot of roles and shifts, it won't be a budgeted cost, obviously. But the use of agency, planned versus unplanned, and how that affects your care minute reporting, particularly for those of you who don't have systems that track agency hours easily, it is problematic. But probably the most important point is the ACFI model really was a maximization model. People were pushing funding levels up as high as they possibly could, and once they were up there, they could stay there. And ANAC really isn't that kind of model. ANAC attracts care minutes with any increase in funding, and if you don't have the staffing capability to meet that increased care minute requirement from your funding, then really pushing up that funding is really pushing up your average cost per care minute. And so it's very, very important to understand, as part of a planning process, what is an achievable roster, what is your current staffing, work towards increasing staffing. So all of these things probably are very, very obvious to you, but the fact is that agency continues to be an area, or agency cost or unplanned cost is the most significant area, and the ability to make real-time costing decisions in your rosters, to have the tools and systems in place to allow you to do that, is more important now than ever before because of care minutes. The other point that's come up recently, it's very important, the budget announcement of all of those employees who are on student visas. Of course, they announced an extension. Not all industries have got an extension, but we have. I guess the most important thing is really understanding what percentage of workforce they represent and how many are currently working more than that 48 hours per fortnight. Their hours are contributing, for a lot of providers, contributing significantly to care minutes, because they relaxed the maximum hours over the last 3 years. But that's going to obviously change at the end of this year when that cap is reinstated, or that's the plan, unless they kick it forward again, which they might. But for some of our providers, there is, we have clients where 15% of their workforce is made up of employees that are on this kind of student visa, and more than half, or nearly half of those students are working more than 48 hours. So for those of you who have not done that analysis or not thought about that, just a heads up to have a look at that as early as the end of this year. That might have a significant impact on your workforce planning, and for some of our providers, some of our clients, it will, and that's quite significant. The third thing, of course, is the question of hybrid roles. So there's a lot of ambiguity still in the interpretation of the care minute rules, what's in, what's out. Obviously RNs and ENs, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But one of the things that's really prompting people is to think about, what they want those levels and those staff to do, and again, Michelle was just mentioning that, you know, that as with natural attrition, they've moved towards a model where all of the people running their facilities are RN. So there's some very valuable RN minutes in those management positions, but we've got a lot of people, even from facility to facility in their own organization, you know, a variation from 25 minutes to 80%, you know, whether that care manager spends a lot of time out on the floor or doesn't spend a lot of time out on the floor, you know, there's quite a lot of variation there. So what do you want your care staff to be doing? And do you want to be able to count their minutes? And a lot of people are moving towards more role definition on what they want those roles to be doing, and thinking about, therefore, what are all those other tasks, organizational tasks, rostering and administration tasks that sometimes fall back on those roles, and how can they manage that differently? How can they staff that, resource that differently? How can they outsource that, or how can they automate it or remove it altogether? So that's another challenge that a lot of people are facing at the moment. Of course, the role of technology, you know, now that it's this, like I said earlier, now that these things are starting to settle in, what is the role of technology and how can it help? It's not surprising what kind of forms they come in. A system that can produce better reporting for you. A lot of people are investing a lot more heavily in BI tools. But the data in your systems needs to feed into those BI tools. So the BI tools are only going to be as good as the quality of the data that are in your systems in the first place. Certainly, if you're trying to make budget decisions and you're trying to make good decisions that are cost-based, you need real-time costing, and that is a functionality, you know, ward interpretation and that kind of functionality is not easy, it's complex, and a lot of systems don't have it, but definitely going forward, that is going to be something that makes a big difference to the way you're managing your business. And integration, particularly information around occupancy and acuity, keeping those, whether that's data brought together in a BI platform or systems talking to each other. And optimizing the cost, having the right person in the right time is really key to make sure that your staffing models, as Jay talked about, doing a lot of work on working out whether you've got the right model. A lot of these reviews, they're the first time we've really looked at some of these in a meaningful way for a decade or many years for a lot of organizations. And it's a really great time. It's a really refreshing time to rethink some of these models and work out better ways of doing things. And lastly, on that point, I guess, QFR reporting really should be a fairly simple process. We should get it to a point where the data that we need is sitting in our systems, that we're managing it on a not quite real time, but it's available fairly regularly. And certainly QFR reporting, 80–90% of the data is coming out of system pretty readily. And it becomes less work. And a lot of providers we're working with are getting to that level of functionality. So, if you're not there, reach out to us and we can help you try to get there a little bit better. The last point I wanted to make on this before we come back to the panel really is really talking about this care minute policy. And Jay mentioned it earlier that they've done it. And I just wanted to reiterate for all of you that if you haven't done this, a lot of people have done a lot of analysis around care minutes, and that pretty much sits in a spreadsheet. It's a calculation, and a lot of your reporting gets fed out of these sheets. But for those of you who haven't considered doing a care minute policy, and it doesn't have to be formal like a policy, it depends on how you define that word in your organization. Some people that's a very big deal, and some people it's just a document. But really, the point is that writing it down has so many advantages that some of them are listed here. Really helps you clarify those multifunction roles. I mean, the most important things to look out for under the new rules are RN, ENs, they're pretty clear. They're registered people. You know who they are. The care workers, the current guidance on the care workers is they need to be paid as a care worker under an award, EBA or individual agreement. So as long as they tick that box, the next most interesting thing is obviously the definitions of direct care. And if they're doing direct care, that's important. But also the guidance that expanded on November the 4th or 10th, or whatever it was last year, really brought back the Royal Commission's recommendation around well-being. So any one-on-one time that is being spent with a resident can be concluded in well-being time and as part of direct care. So that's a really big opportunity to look at how much care is being provided by lots of different roles. As long as they tick one of those boxes, That includes lots of different roles. And don't be caught out excluding lifestyle because they're a lifestyle role and other people in the organization. It's really the work they're doing that matters. And if your lifestyle people are spending, are care workers and are spending time one-on-one with residents, then have another look at their time and whether you're calculating that properly. And then also back to all of those valuable RNs in management roles. And are you counting all of the minutes for those RNs, including administration time, and not organizational administration time, but care administration? So the admin of care includes things like, contacting doctors about care requirements, contacting families about care requirements, all of the time spent organizing those things, as part of admissions and other things like that. There is a lot of time trapped in the admin of care that could be included. So make sure you're capturing all that, and the one-on-one time. So if they're RNs and they're care managers and they're spending a lot of time with residents, and they all do, make sure you're looking carefully at those care minutes and including all of those as well. But write it down so that you're clear about how you're defining those roles. The team that's doing the QFR reporting can use it. The HR team can use it to make sure that's aligned with all of their position descriptions and their awards and etc. The document can be reviewed if things change. So if things change later on, you can come back to that document and say, how does that, and there's guidance coming up all the time. And then lastly, of course, if anybody knocks on your door and says, show me how you're working this out, then you've got a document to provide and say, this is how we're interpreting the rules right now. You tell us if we're wrong, because there is still some ambiguity in the rules at the moment. So make sure you're having a good review of that. And if you need any help, then reach out to us and we can help you. Back to the panel. Has Matt showed up? No? Yes. Hi, Matt.
G'day, Andrew. How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Nothing like a few technology challenges to upset a good webinar, Andrew, but I'm going well, thank you.
That's great. It's great to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Do you want to, we'll let you go first then. So we had a little bit of a chat with Jay and Michelle earlier about how they've sort of coped with care minutes.
Yeah.
Then here we would be talking about what you're thinking about doing next. Why don't you try to do both?
Sure, not a problem. Look, I think where we've come from, to me, it's the whole industry and sort of the Salvation Army is no different. Is grappling with a different level of sophistication in this space, Andrew. So the old set and forget approach, where you could do a roster, work to that, and really it was only up and until you kind of stress that roster with changes in acuity did you kind of go, we need to sort of put more people here and there. Now it's we need a whole team of people that are really focused on, as you've just mentioned, we had to get our definitions right. We've had to really look at how we're capturing the data from our payroll systems, our time sheeting systems, because if we're not understanding what our obligation is and then how we're tracking over time, then it's really difficult to achieve the target that's been set. So we need that visibility, and we need it sort of every week, every fortnight. So we've done a lot of work with our operations team, our data analysts, trying to capture this information and putting it into a database so that we have that consistent visibility. And let's not forget the impact of agency. It's really trying to capture that. So we feel like we've got a good handle on tracking that now, which is great. But I suppose where we're headed is it's really about how the business now makes decisions, Andrew. And I think all of us in aged care now are realizing that you really have to engage a lot more, and your businesses have to become a lot more dynamic. So how do we empower our rostering team to make those decisions? How do we best work with our finance team to give them the data and to work with that rostering team to help them make the decisions to what are the things that are impacting on our target, and then how have we managed to hit that. So we're looking at systems, I suppose, like a lot of people. I think it's important that we need to empower our staff to make those decisions. So we're looking at what are those sustainable systems. But then I suppose the big thing is, well, what's going to drive that decision making? So do you want to try and keep your rosters stable, in which case you might try and keep your occupancy quite stable and your resi mix quite stable, so then you can try and keep those rosters stable? Or do you sort of take more of a, well, let's focus on our occupancy and therefore not so much on the resi mix, we'll take whatever comes, and then, you know, be much better, you know, look at what are the systems and the processes that we can use to flex our rosters as that those requirements are changing, particularly with, say, changes in occupancy. So that's what we're sort of grappling with, and what we're going to be focused on as we continue to sort of transition to that 1 October start date for the mandatory care minutes, Andrew, and certainly empowering our staff to make the right decisions and achieve the right outcomes. Obviously, with the star ratings, it's a significant part of that. So it's really that automation, that systematization, and making sure that we've got those processes in place.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. Michelle?
Thanks, Andrew.
Next.
I was just reflecting on something that Matt said, and I was thinking, as far as we're concerned, obviously we're going to keep monitoring and gradually increasing our rosters to meet that October target as we can. But frankly, with staffing the way it is at the moment, we just continue to recruit, particularly around RNs. I have moments where I don't feel we're in the driver's seat anymore. I feel that the staff are more in the driver's seat than we are. I guess, like everyone, we're experiencing high sick leave call-ins, staff churn still at that AIN level, and lots of requests for supporting of permanent residency visas, all of that, which of course adds to the cost of operations. And you know, sometimes you feel you're being blackmailed a little bit, and of course there's no guarantee, even if you pay for those things, that the staff will stay with you. So we're working very hard to you know, improve our culture in our homes. Well, not improve it, but ensure that it's the best it can be. You know, putting on staff events, trying to engage with our staff all the time. In regards to the percentages of the care minutes, as you discussed, Andrew, we have, since the first submission per quarter, we have varied those percentages a little. I'll say that we've had to, in some instances. We started very low with people like our general managers and our care managers. We didn't put a lot of their hours or minutes into the calculation. But in various homes where we've struggled to meet the RN targets, what we've done is that we have increased, and again, it's more regional, we have increased our AIN workforce. So we have a lot of ENs, which unfortunately aren't being recognised. If they were recognised, we'd be meeting our RN targets. So where we don't have that, to try and be more compliant and to get that star rating up, we ensure that we have lots of AINs on the rosters. In some of the homes where they're experiencing high volumes of sick calls, you know, up to 4 or 6 a shift, which is very hard to manage. We are over rostering every day by 25% to try and balance that, because they recognise what's going to happen. You know, with a large casualised workforce, we're trying to meet with staff and get them to commit more to the organisation in a, you know, part-time or full-time capacity. And like everyone else, we do have to use agencies. So we do shop around for the best agency prices we can. I can advise you that year to date, our figures for agency use, which I think are pretty good from what I hear from others, is about $60,000. So at this point, we are managing it, but it's a tough call every day. And I worry about burnout of our management teams. I worry about stress levels, increased workers, comp claims, et cetera, because you end up with, if you've got a depleted roster because you can't get staff, you end up putting more strain on the other staff, more injury prone, care delivery, the whole thing. So it is a perfect storm, but we're trying to manage it the best way we can. And as I said, we adjust our percentages, not unrealistically. And I still have people in the exec team that are registered nurses that don't appear in any of our care minute calculations, including myself, even though I might spend considerable time discussing a resident with a family, etc. So we do have a little bit of reserve up our sleeve, but we try not to go down that path at this point to remain compliant.
Yeah, some really 25% overstaffing. That's over rostering. That's incredible, isn't it? Not sustainable. Excellent. Jay, thoughts from you?
Yeah, Andrew, I guess just quickly in the essence of time, reiterate everything that Michelle just shared in regards to workforce challenges. That'll be our priorities moving forward. We'll continue to strengthen our workforce retention strategies most heavily and scrutinise our agency pain point. They'll be our two major focuses. It's more and more labour intensive to manage and govern that agency pain point that we all share. And we'll look to some more advanced technology solutions to find efficiencies probably in the first instance. And of course, continue to find solutions to reducing the dependency. In addition to that, we'll mine some of our data that we now have access to, thanks to the technology that we've invested in already, and work to refine that optimal occupancy, case mix targets, etc. that Matthew referred to just prior. I guess most importantly, we'll continue to remain agile as we move forward and alter course whenever any one of these decisions doesn't result in one of our intended trends. Yeah, that's probably it from us.
Thanks, Jay. Thanks so much. Yeah, things are changing, keep changing all the time, aren't they? So definitely, so great comments there about data and about retention. Definitely, keeping one person's is one less person you have to find, isn't it? So that's key. I'll just round out a couple of things. We don't have a lot of any time for the chats, but I just wanted to remind everyone that we do read the chats very carefully and take themes. And if anybody wants to follow us up about any of those things, please do. I wanted to just offer something exclusive to the people listening here. If you don't have what you need to really efficiently manage your care minutes from a reporting point of view, from a planning point of view, from a forecasting point of view, all of those things that everyone's been talking about, we do have a piece of technology that you can use. And what we want to do is offer to 20 people, 20 providers on this call, if you're interested, a free trial where we will help you. We'll calculate your last QFR for you, the data for your last QFR for you, and forecast the next how you're going in your care minutes for the next one. And we will do that for 20 facilities for 20 people for free to show you how this reporting and technology might work for you, and no obligation, of course. But if you are struggling with that, then we're prepared to do that for you for free for 20 providers that are on this call. If you follow that link that's on your page there, or that QFR code, and sign up on a form, we will show you how it works and show you how easy it can be if you have the right technology. So please take advantage of that. That's just an exclusive offer for the people who are on this webinar. The next webinar, look, we're heading towards June, end of the financial year. I think what we wanted to do is really have a deep dive focus on operational efficiency and financial sustainability. So all of these things changing, care minutes, all of these things, rising costs, wage costs, all of these things are happening. Let's just have a review of how we're all going as a business. And you've seen all the stats and all the things that are out there, Stuart Brown and all the other things that talk about how many businesses are in the red or in the black and all that sort of thing. So please join us for that one at the end of June, the 29th of June. We're going to have a webinar that's dedicated to how we're doing as businesses and what we can do to really improve the performance of the business. And just a last moment and a last point, just to remind all of the people out there who want to write trash about the industry and what they're trying to do, to run more efficiently so that we can provide better care. All of this funding ultimately flows through to better care. So we will be looking at care funding, but also at the future of accommodation and user pays and all of those additional services, all of those sorts of things, all of the ways that we generate income and provide funding for better care. So thank you all for joining. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you for your comments and your thoughts. That's what makes this really interesting for people. Thank you, everybody, for taking an hour out of your day. We'll see you next month.